They refused to watch me get my PhD because it would overshadow my brother's promising future. Now their perfect son is in rehab, while I'm winning awards they'll never see. Growing up, I always knew I was the backup plan. My parents had this grand vision of raising academic royalty, and my brother was their crown prince while I was just the spare. Every dinner conversation revolved around his latest achievement. Every family gathering showcased his trophies and certificates, and every decision was made with his future in mind. When I started showing interest in science, they were supportive but never enthusiastic. It was more like they were humoring a child's hobby rather than nurturing genuine talent. Meanwhile, my brother's every move was orchestrated with surgical precision. Private tutors, expensive prep courses, networking events with other high-achieving families. They treated his education like a military campaign, complete with strategic planning sessions and progress reports. The funny thing is, I genuinely love learning. While my brother struggled through his advanced classes with constant supervision and pressure, I devoured books about space and physics in my bedroom. I'd stay up late reading about black holes and quantum mechanics, not because anyone expected me to, but because it fascinated me. My parents saw this as me being studious and responsible, but never as a sign of exceptional ability. High school was when the divide really became apparent. My brother was the star athlete, the student council president, the one with early admission promises from prestigious universities. I was the quiet one with perfect grades who nobody really noticed. My parents attended every single one of his games, but missed half of my academic competitions because they conflicted with his schedule. When college application time came around, they hired a professional consultant for him while I filled out my applications at the kitchen table. They celebrated his acceptance to a top-tier university with a party, complete with a cake shaped like his future alma mater's logo. When I got into an excellent program with a full scholarship, they took me out for dinner at a chain restaurant and reminded me how proud they were that I was following in my brother's footsteps. College was actually liberating for me. Away from the constant comparisons and the suffocating attention on my brother's every move, I thrived. I threw myself into research, spent countless hours in the lab, and discovered I had a real talent for astrophysics. My professors noticed my dedication and offered me opportunities to work on cutting-edge projects. During my junior year, I was already being courted by graduate programs. My research on stellar formation had caught the attention of some significant people in the field. But when I called home to share the exciting news about my first published paper, the conversation quickly shifted to my brother's midterm grades and his upcoming internship interviews. The pattern continued through my master's program. Every achievement I shared was met with polite acknowledgement followed by a detailed update about my brother's progress. He was struggling more than they let on, but they painted every setback as a temporary challenge that would only make him stronger. By the time I started my PhD program, I had stopped expecting them to understand the significance of my work. I was studying the formation of galaxies, contributing to research that could reshape our understanding of the universe, but to them, I was just the daughter who was good at school while their son was building his future empire. The real tension started during my third year when I began making serious progress on my dissertation. My research was getting attention from the international community, and there was talk of fast-tracking my defense. Meanwhile, my brother was struggling through his undergraduate program, changing majors twice and taking extended breaks for various reasons they never fully explained. When I told them I might graduate earlier than expected, their reaction was immediate and intense. They were worried about how it would look, how it might affect my brother's confidence, how it would disrupt their carefully planned timeline where he was supposed to achieve greatness first. The conversations became increasingly uncomfortable. They suggested I slow down my research, maybe take a break, perhaps consider switching to a different advisor who might not push me so hard. They framed it as concern for my well-being, but I could see the real anxiety in their eyes. Their perfect narrative was falling apart. The breaking point came when I scheduled my dissertation defense. I was nervous and excited, ready to share my groundbreaking research on galaxy formation with the academic community. I sent them the invitation with a note about how much it would mean to have them there, how this was the culmination of years of work they had supported. Their response was devastating. They couldn't attend because it would create too much pressure on my brother, who was already struggling with his own academic timeline. They needed to focus their energy on supporting him through this difficult period. They suggested we celebrate privately after my brother had found his footing. I stood in that lecture hall, defending research that had taken me to the edge of human knowledge, looking out at an audience of brilliant minds who had come to hear my work, and felt completely alone. My advisor tried to console me afterward, explaining that family dynamics could be complicated, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow failed them by succeeding. The graduation ceremony was even worse. I walked across that stage to receive my PhD, the culmination of 8 years of higher education, and saw empty seats where my family should have been. Other graduates had entire cheering sections, grandparents with cameras, siblings holding congratulatory signs. I had my advisor and a few close friends who had become my chosen family. That night, I called them to share the news of my graduation. They were polite but distant, asking about my plans and whether I thought this would help me find a stable position. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of the magnitude of what I had accomplished. Just a brief conversation that felt more like a courtesy call than a family connection. Update 1. The first year after graduation was a whirlwind of opportunities and continued family disappointment. I landed a position at a research institution that was perfect for my career trajectory, working on projects that excited me and collaborating with people who respected my contributions. Meanwhile, my brother was struggling through his 5th year of undergraduate studies, changing majors again and taking reduced course loads. My parents' response to my career success was muted at best. When I told them about my new position, they worried about whether I was taking on too much too soon, whether I should have waited for my brother to establish himself first. They seemed to view my achievements as somehow selfish, as if I was deliberately outpacing their timeline. 6 months into my new position, I was selected to present my research at a major international conference. This was a huge honor, the kind of recognition that established careers and opened doors to even greater opportunities. When I called to share the news, my mother's first question was whether this would require travel during my brother's final semester, as if my presence at his graduation was somehow more important than this career-defining moment. The conference was incredible. My presentation was well received, and I found myself in conversations with leading researchers from around the world. Several people mentioned that my work was exactly the kind of innovative thinking the field needed. I felt like I was finally being seen for who I was, not as someone's sister or daughter, but as a scientist in my own right. But the real shock came when I returned home to find dozens of messages from neighbors, family, friends, and distant relatives. Someone had posted about my conference presentation on social media, and word was spreading through our community. People were congratulating my parents on having such an accomplished daughter, asking why they hadn't mentioned my achievements, wondering when they would see me featured in the local newspaper. My parents were clearly uncomfortable with the attention. They had spent years building a narrative around my brother's potential, and now people were asking difficult questions about why their genius son wasn't making similar headlines. The carefully constructed image of their family's academic dynasty was starting to crack under scrutiny. This was when I began to notice changes in my brother's behavior during our infrequent conversations. He seemed more withdrawn, more anxious, and often appeared exhausted despite his reduced academic schedule. When I asked about his well-being, he would deflect quickly, changing the subject or ending the conversation abruptly. My parents' reaction to community attention was to double down on their support for my brother while downplaying my achievements. They would mention to neighbors that I was doing well, but quickly shift the conversation to my brother's upcoming graduation, his internship applications, his bright future ahead. It was as if they were trying to maintain the illusion that he was still the family's academic star. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when I was invited to give a lecture at my undergraduate alma mater. This was a significant honor, typically reserved for distinguished alumni who had made substantial contributions to their fields. I was genuinely excited about the opportunity to inspire current students and share my journey. When I told my parents about the invitation, their reaction was swift and negative. They were concerned about the timing, worried that it might overshadow my brother's graduation plans, anxious about how it would look to have me speaking at the university while he was still struggling to complete his degree. They actually asked me to decline the invitation. That conversation was a turning point for me. I realized that no matter what I achieved, no matter how much recognition I received, they would always see my success as a threat to their preferred narrative. They weren't proud of me. They were embarrassed by me for not following their script. I gave the lecture anyway, and it was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my career. The students were engaged and inspired, asking thoughtful questions about research, career paths, and overcoming obstacles. Several approached me afterward to thank me for showing them what was possible in their field. But the real surprise came when I received a message from my brother that night. He had somehow found out about the lecture and wanted to tell me how proud he was. It was the first time in years that anyone in my family had expressed genuine pride in my accomplishments, and it came from the person I least expected. Update 2. Everything changed during my brother's final semester. What started as a routine family dinner became the night that shattered everything I thought I knew about our family dynamics. My brother had been acting increasingly strange, missing classes, avoiding family gatherings, and when he did show up, he seemed jittery and unfocused. My parents were in full damage control mode, making excuses for his behavior and insisting that he was just experiencing normal pre-graduation stress. They had already started planning his graduation party, sending out invitations and booking a venue, as if their enthusiasm could somehow will him across the finish line. But 3 weeks before his scheduled graduation, my brother disappeared for 2 days. My parents were frantic, calling his friends, checking local hospitals, and eventually filing a missing persons report. They found him at a hospital 2 states away, admitted for what they initially described as exhaustion and dehydration. The truth came out slowly, in fragments and reluctant admissions. My brother had been struggling with addiction for years, not just to illegal substances, but to prescription medications that had been given to him with my parents' knowledge and encouragement. The golden child had been chemically enhanced to maintain his perfect image. It started in high school when he was struggling to keep up with the academic and athletic demands my parents had placed on him. They found a doctor who prescribed stimulants for focus, sleep aids for recovery, and eventually steroids to maintain his athletic performance. What began as performance enhancement had spiraled into full-blown addiction. The most devastating revelation was that my parents had been active participants in this destruction. They had researched enhancement protocols, found doctors willing to prescribe medications, and monitored his usage like coaches managing an athlete. They had literally drugged their golden child in pursuit of their academic dynasty dreams. When my brother finally told me the full truth during one of his lucid moments, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. All those years of feeling inadequate, of watching him receive praise and attention while I was ignored, and he had been suffering in ways I couldn't have imagined. The perfect son was actually the family's victim. My parents' reaction to his hospitalization was to immediately begin planning his rehabilitation and recovery, treating it like another project to be managed and optimized. They researched the best facilities, interviewed counselors, and created detailed recovery timelines. Even in crisis, they couldn't stop trying to control and orchestrate outcomes. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. While they had been so focused on maintaining my brother's artificial success, I had been quietly building real achievements. My research was gaining international recognition, I was being invited to speak at major conferences, and I had recently been offered a position at a prestigious research institute. But the most painful part was realizing how much damage their favoritism had done to both of us. My brother had been destroyed by their impossible expectations and chemical assistance, while I had been emotionally abandoned for being authentically successful. Neither of us had received the unconditional love and support that children deserve. During his first month in rehabilitation, my brother reached out to me regularly. He was dealing with withdrawal, therapy, and the crushing weight of realizing how much of his life had been built on artificial foundations. But he was also discovering who he was without the chemicals and the pressure, and that person was someone I genuinely liked and respected. One of his letters particularly stood out. He wrote about how he had always known I was the naturally gifted one, how he had watched me excel effortlessly while he struggled with every assignment despite pharmaceutical assistance. He had felt like a fraud for years, knowing that his achievements were chemically enhanced while mine were purely earned. The rehabilitation process was brutal for the entire family, but it was also revealing. My parents were forced to confront the reality of what they had done to their golden child and what they had overlooked in their other daughter. The academic dynasty they had tried to build was revealed as a house of cards built on deception and artificial enhancement. Meanwhile, my career was reaching new heights. I received notification that my research had been selected for a prestigious international award, recognition that would establish me as a leading voice in my field. The irony was overwhelming. While my parents had been desperately trying to manufacture success for my brother, I had been quietly achieving the kind of recognition they had always dreamed of. The award ceremony was scheduled for the same month my brother was expected to complete his rehabilitation program. For the first time in years, I had to make a choice about whether to prioritize my family's needs or my own achievements. The decision wasn't as difficult as I had expected. Final update. The award ceremony was everything I had dreamed it would be. Standing on that stage, receiving recognition from the international scientific community, I felt validated in a way that transcended my family's approval or disapproval. The research that had consumed my life for years was being acknowledged as groundbreaking, and I was being welcomed into the ranks of established scientists. But the real surprise came when I looked out into the audience and saw my brother sitting in the third row. He had completed his rehabilitation program early and had traveled across the country to be there. He looked different, thinner, more focused, but also more genuine than I had seen him in years. When our eyes met, he smiled and gave me a thumbs up that meant more than any standing ovation. After the ceremony, we had our first real conversation in probably a decade. He told me about his recovery process, how he was learning to live without chemical enhancement, and how terrifying but liberating it was to discover his authentic self. He was planning to return to school, but this time pursuing something he actually enjoyed rather than what our parents had chosen for him. The most shocking revelation came when he told me about the conversations he had been having with our parents during family therapy sessions. They were finally being forced to confront the damage they had done, not just to him through chemical manipulation, but to me through emotional neglect. The therapist had helped them understand how their favoritism had harmed both of their children in different, but equally devastating ways. My parents reached out to me a few weeks after the award ceremony. The conversation was awkward and painful, filled with long pauses and careful words. They were trying to apologize, but they didn't really know how to acknowledge the years of dismissal and emotional abandonment. They asked if they could attend my next speaking engagement, as if one appearance could somehow balance years of absence. I told them I needed time to process everything, and that rebuilding our relationship would require genuine change, not just words. They had spent so many years prioritizing appearance over authenticity that I wasn't sure they were capable of the kind of honest reflection that would be necessary for real healing. The scientific community's response to my award was overwhelming. I received offers from multiple institutions, invitations to collaborate on exciting projects, and opportunities to shape the future direction of research in my field. Everything I had worked toward was finally coming to fruition, and I was being recognized as the scientist I had always believed I could become. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from my brother. He had started a blog about his recovery journey, and in one of his posts, he wrote about growing up with a sister who was a genius but who had been overlooked because she didn't fit their parents' predetermined narrative. He described watching me achieve incredible things while being ignored, and how that had contributed to his own sense of fraudulence and inadequacy. His honesty about our family dynamics was both painful and healing. He was publicly acknowledging what I had always known but never been able to articulate, that our parents' favoritism had damaged both of us, creating a dynamic where neither of us could be authentically successful. 6 months after the award ceremony, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I accepted a position at a research institute on the opposite coast, far from my family and the complicated dynamics that had shaped my life. It wasn't running away, it was choosing to build a life where my achievements could be celebrated without qualification or comparison. My brother was supportive of the decision, understanding that sometimes distance is necessary for healing. He was building his own new life, studying something he was passionate about for the first time, and discovering talents that had been buried under years of artificial enhancement and parental pressure. The last conversation I had with my parents before moving was surprisingly honest. They finally admitted that they had been so focused on creating their perfect academic dynasty that they had failed to see and appreciate the children they actually had. They acknowledged that their treatment of both of us had been harmful, though I sensed they still didn't fully understand the depth of the damage. As I settled into my new position and new life, I reflected on how differently things might have gone if my parents had been able to celebrate authentic achievement rather than trying to manufacture it. My brother might have found his true calling years earlier without the destructive cycle of chemical enhancement. I might have grown up feeling valued and supported rather than overlooked and dismissed. But I also realized that their failure to recognize my worth had inadvertently given me something valuable, the ability to pursue my passions without external validation. While my brother had been crushed by the weight of their expectations, I had learned to find satisfaction in the work itself, in the pure joy of discovery and understanding. Today, my research continues to gain recognition, and I wake up every morning excited about the questions I'm trying to answer. My brother is thriving in his recovery and his new academic pursuits, building genuine achievements for the first time in his life. Our relationship has become stronger than it ever was during our childhood, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what we survived. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my parents had attended my PhD graduation, if they had celebrated my achievements with the same enthusiasm they had reserved for my brother's manufactured successes. But I've come to understand that their recognition was never what I needed. The validation that matters comes from the work itself, from the contribution I'm making to human knowledge, and from the respect of colleagues who value substance over appearance. The academic dynasty my parents dreamed of building never materialized the way they envisioned. Instead, they got something better, two children who eventually found their authentic paths and learned to support each other despite the damage that had been done. The golden child learned to shine with his own light, and the overlooked daughter discovered that her achievements were more meaningful for being genuinely earned. In the end, their plan failed spectacularly, but from that failure, something real and lasting emerged. We became the family they never knew how to create, built on honesty, mutual support, and authentic achievement rather than artificial enhancement and manufactured success.